So apparently, in the Corinthian church, there were these preachers who would come in, and they would be such amazing, gifted preachers that everybody in the church liked the preachers better than they liked Paul. And Paul writes really well, but Paul seems to admit in the passages before that when he shows up physically, they expected him to look differently. So he writes bold and strong and courageous, and then when he shows up, apparently, and the rumor is in history and the research, it says that Paul was not a very impressive man physically. Apparently he was bow-legged, they say. He might have been, bold, he might have been ugly, he might have been short and really skinny. All right? And that he did not speak well. That his public speaking was not really his thing in the Corinthian church. And so they say, he's struggling with the fact that these Corinthian members are like, this is it? This is you? This is Paul? I expected you to be a foot taller and more handsome with a much deeper voice. You have a high tenor. You're not a baritone. This is it. This is Paul. And so he begins a certain doubt. He has to respond to these folks. And so he begins by saying, I could boast about how spiritually strong I am, about how I got caught up to heaven, how I got caught in the third heaven, and I saw these revelations. I could boast about that. But then he says, but there was given to me a thorn in my flesh. And then he says something even more frightening, a messenger from Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded, take this away. But the Lord said, my grace is sufficient for you. And in this time, we're doing a little better. Today's much better than last week. Last week, everyone was coughing. Today, I don't hear much sniffles or coughing. But in this time where the weather is absolutely schizophrenic, right? In this time, we get sick. And in this time, we have to persist while sick. We persist while struggling. We persist while suffering. We persist while in pain. We persist while in doubt. And like Paul, we may say, Lord, take this away from me. But like Paul, God may say, my grace is sufficient for you. Which is the reality of our lives. God will not take away everything that causes us pain. God will not take away every struggle. God will not take away every hardship. God will not protect you from misunderstandings or insults. And your Christian character is not going to be protected from people insulting you or misunderstanding you. Quite frankly, if they say something bad about you, that does not mean that you're not being Christian. That just means that you're living in Christianity. Because that's what we do. We talk about people, whether they deserve it or not. But our character is to be able to say, Lord, though this hurts, though I don't like it, though I am weak to stop the gossips, nonetheless, I've asked you to stop it and take it away, but you've said, my grace is sufficient for you. So even though you may be thoroughly misunderstood, and your name has been thoroughly trampled underfoot, God's grace is sufficient for you. Physically, you may not know why you persist with the pain that you have. You may not, you've grown, you almost have an identity because of the pain that you have, and you maybe have prayed, Lord, take this away from me. And you may think that God may not love you because God hasn't taken it away. No. God is saying to you, as he said to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. Even depression, even anxiety. You know, it's really okay to admit that in church. And I know it's scary. It's scary to admit our weaknesses. But some of us, we get depressed. We get anxious. We get afraid. And even then, we may say, Lord, take this away. And God doesn't remove it immediately, but instead says to you, my grace is sufficient. In all of these hard lessons. God is teaching you to rely on Him. God is teaching you to trust in Him. And God is keeping you from being self-sufficient, which is another word for arrogant. When you think that you have made it all on your own, you may not realize how much the Lord has been moving in your life. And when you forget about how much God has done in your life, that is a very dangerous place to be. The moment you realize, I have come this far because of the grace of God, is the moment you learn to trust more and more in God. And God is the one who is faithful and true, even when there are changes and hardships. God is the one who is loving and merciful, even when things become difficult and painful. God is the one who will always bring you through, whose will is perfect, whose timing is just right, and who will always give you whatever you need to bear, and He will never give you more than you can bear. God is the one who will ultimately give you joy and peace and meaning in your life. But you have to learn to trust in God. But the only way that trust may actually be brought forward out of your life is when you lose the illusion that you are in control. When you lose the illusion that you can make it all on your own. And when you realize that in your